All right, hey there, fellow coder. Welcome to this next installment in our series where we are building a real-world web app from scratch, utilizing React on the front end and Spring Boot via Java in the back end, tying it all together with a MySQL database. So in this installment, we're going to be diving into the concept of context in React. What is context? When should you use it? And when should you not use it? So if that is of interest to you, stick around. All right, so welcome back. Let's dive into it. Basically, some background on what this is. So React Context allows you to essentially store state in one place and pass it through all of the components in a given tree of components, which could literally be all of the components in your app if you wanted it to be. This is essentially known as a global variable, right? Global variables they have their use cases. They are useful in sort of a sliver of cases that you find in your application's development journey and whatnot. So therefore, you should use it sparingly. Not everything should be global. That's usually a bad idea. Essentially, if you need to pass information from a parent component into a bunch of child components, but only one of those children, need to leverage that data. So, for example, if you had you have like your main page, and the main page has a navigation bar, and the navigation bar has another component inside of it, like the right-hand side of the navigation bar or something like that. And that's where you need to get access to the user's data, or I shouldn't say user's data, get access to something like a theme or something, like a dark theme versus a light theme, and that's the only component that needs access to that, and everything else doesn't need it, and you're passing it from the parent down. That's where you should favor composition. There's a great article on composition at the bottom of the screen there that covers this concept. It takes a little bit to wrap your brain around, but we've actually used it in one of our components already. The private route component leverages this concept of composition, where we pass the children into the private route. So you'll see me create a private route, and then inside of it you'll have a different component, like a dashboard or a code viewer dashboard or assignment view or code reviewer assignment view. Like, these components are nested as children inside of the overall private route, and the private route is defined such that you can pass the children in, and it just renders them as as you pass them in. That's a good example of leveraging composition, right? You're sort of defining you're allowing the parent object, the private route object, to, be generic in terms of how to render the children. It doesn't care what the children are. It just says, hey, I'm going to render the children whatever you pass into me. And then you can define the children, what they will be in like the app.js file or something. So that's the idea of composition. However, in this case, when we're using users, so going onto our workflow, in our assignment submission application, we do have a use case for leveraging context, which is the user's state, right? The JWT. So the JWT we use across pretty much every single component in our application, because we leverage the JWT, the JSON Web Token, to be able to make fetch calls to our backend, to our Java server, right? So you'll see in every one of my components, I have the constant JWT, set JWT, methods or whatever, and then I use the local state hook and everything, and we have to grab it and read that value pretty much in every single one of our components. So this is a perfect use case for leveraging context because it's used everywhere, right? So, having said that, our goal here for this video, hopefully I'll be able to do it, is we want to convert our current use of the JWT via the setter and getter. We want to convert it into using context instead, because like I said, we're using it everywhere. So, having said that, let's code subtitle. I forgot to remove subtitle from our thing. Anyway, cool. So let's code. Let's flip over to let me shut this down. Here we go. So this is the article that I was talking about, by the way, for composition versus inheritance. And they talk about, something called fancy border and passing in the children. But that is what we do in the private route. So in private route right here, we have this concept of children, right? We're grabbing the children from props. And in the app.js, we have private route here, where we're passing in, code, whatever the child object is. Now, I had done some code where I was off video, secretly without you guys watching me. I was trying to solve the problem of the bug I was hitting in the last video, where when we were logging in, it was like caching the state of the old login. So if you logged in as a code reviewer and then as a student, it was like caching the views and stuff. I solved it by doing this stuff where we're passing functions down into children. But then I realized, hey, a better use case, a better solution here is just to use context. So that's what we need to dive into today. So let's do React, not content, context. If we Google React context, they have a little article on how to implement context, when to use it, etc., and when not to use it, which I've already covered. So how do we use it? Now, I haven't actually done this yet, so this is going to be, I didn't practice before I started hitting record, and that's where, if you don't like that kind of video, then you're not probably gonna like this video, but you can watch me fumble through and figure out how to do this, which I think is valuable, to see someone like myself who has like 15 years of experience, I guess 15 plus years of experience coding, not with React, but coding in general. So yeah, you'll see me fumble through it, and hopefully it gives you some reassurance that if you struggle too, it's okay. All right, everyone struggles with this stuff. Unless you do it every day, then you're not familiar with it. So let's look at it. So this whole my context, React create context, some default value. This creates a context object. When React renders a component that subscribes to the context object, it will read the current context value from the closest matching provider above it in the tree. Okay, that doesn't really mean much to me at the moment, but let's see how to make it work. The default value argument is only used when a component does not have a matching provider. Interesting. So my context.provider value equals some value. So let's see an example. So this is a class. This is using an older view. It's not a functional. I shouldn't say old. It's just not a functional function component. So it uses all this stuff. And then, so I guess that's how you get access to the value. You can do this .context. My class context type equals my context. Okay. Static. Blah, 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 blah. Context consumer. Okay. So in other words, the my class in this case is kind of like our user component, right? We would create a user component that would get access to the JWT and all that stuff. And then we can inject it via the consumer. The consumer is all the other components that will be able to access that value. Okay. Context object accepts a display name. React DevTools uses this string to determine what to display for the context. Display name. My context.provider. My display name.provider. Gotcha. So that's what you can. All right, I think I understand that. That's what you use as the name of the component or whatever. Let's see. So we have themes, export theme context, create context themes.dark is the default value. Okay. So we have the themes, and we're exporting this as well. So then we have a themed button. The themed button grabs theme, which is, not there. Sorry, that's just a variable name. This.context. So, and then how does it know themed button, theme context? Okay. And is that how they defined it above here when we said, no, it was display name. I might need to see a more complete. So here's the React app.js file. So where do we, so the theme button inside of theme provider uses the state. So theme context dot provider, theme context theme button passes the toolbar inside of a page. Okay, well, it's definitely not super straightforward. Let's see what we can do with the information that we've been provided. So, context provider and consumer, right? I wonder if we can look at a more real, so if we say React context example, instead of using their docs, which are great, let's use, oh, my battery's going to die on my watch. So let's use a React context. And what version of React are we using, by the way? I think it's like 16 or something. We need to make sure that we use the right versions and whatnot. Let me take my watch off and charge it while we're using version probably 16 or 17. So let's say React, you know, v16 or something context. We might as well say 17 because that's probably the version that we're using. Context. Gradual upgrades. So I don't see anything here with blog. Well, I don't know if example. I don't know if there's. It doesn't seem like it, at least through some quick googling, that context needs or has a bunch of different versions or anything. So let's see. So they have something called count context. So they say import React count context from create context, and we have a count display function, and then we use context. Gotcha. Use context is the hook, count context. So that's how we see the count. So first off, I don't have an initial value for count context. If I wanted an initial value, I would call React create context with a value, but I don't include a value, and that was intentional. The default value is only useful in a situation like this. What is a situation like this? Use context blah. Okay, because we don't have a default value for count context, we'll get an error on the highlighted line where we're destructuring, the value in use context. Is because our default value is undefined. You cannot destructure undefined. Okay, that makes sense. Then there's a custom provider context, or the count provider. See, my thing is, where does this get defined? Count provider, right? There's count display. So wouldn't it say what is count provider? Okay, here's the function count provider. So we have count provider function that returns count context dot provider with some stuff. So it's almost like we need a user provider. In my opinion, this means that we should create a user provider. So a user provider, which makes sense. You want to provide the user to a bunch of other components, right? So let's start with that. Let's do RSC, boom, and we'll say user provider. Okay, so this user provider does what? Well, let's take a look at their count provider. Now this has children and stuff and some additional stuff that we don't necessarily care about. What we care about is essentially use local state, right? Which is the JSON web token. Okay. Which again, I don't know if this is the proper way to do it. This is you're seeing me, stumble my way through this at the moment. We'll see if this works. So we have our JWT that we're grabbing from local storage. And then it looks like what we're saying is instead of returning a div, we're going to return the provider object, right? So we'll say user provider, or sorry, user context dot user context dot provider. The value is value. See, this is where I'm assuming that's how you pass it through. I'm not sure. I feel like that's how you pass it through. You say value, equals JWT is how I feel. But yeah, so now it doesn't know what user context is. So let's keep. So where do they find count context? Was that above? We have count provider. There's no count. So there's one up here, count context equals, react dot whatever. This is in account context.js. First, let's create a file at source count context, and we'll create our context there. So do we have to have it in a different file? Like, why wouldn't we just create it all inside of the same thing? But hey, let's pay attention to what they're doing, right? So, oh wait, here we go. No, that's the same JS file. Where was it that I was just looking at I was looking at their example code, blah, 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 custom provider, that's an app.js. This is, okay, this is still count context. Yeah, okay, sorry, I missed that line. So they are doing it above the function, so they're having a const, we call this user context equals probably use, or create context, right? Boom. So we're defining user context above this user provider method, right? And we have some state in the provider. Fair enough. That's where I have my state in the provider. And then we want to export the, this is count provider. Now I'm doing default. I don't know if it has to be, this is like, this doesn't mean default. So the contrived example, I'm intentionally over engineering to show you what a more real world scenario does. Okay, this does not mean that it has to be complicated every time, but feel free to use state if that suits your scenario. Okay, which is what I did do. Okay, so let's see what we have here, and let's see if it works, right? So in the app, there's the count provider that will be used inside of like count display, and then count display uses the context to get the value. Okay, fair enough. So in our app.js file, basically anywhere we want to provide the user information, we can do that with the provider component, anywhere here. Now, basically, I kind of want to, like, the individual routes don't need to have access to that info, but private route does, in my opinion, because private route is where we start to decide, is someone logged in or not, and what should we do about it? And then any child components from private route also need it. So basically, my code would be wrapping each and every private route with the user provider, context, and you'd move this up into the user provider, right? However, that would be annoying to wrap every single one with user provider. So I'm wondering, I'm just spitballing here, could I wrap all of routes with user provider, right? So pass all of the routes up into user provider. So the parent object becomes user provider, right? I don't know. We'll see if that works. Now, just to look at their example, there's count provider, and that's all that's passed in, and then count display is what uses they do use context. So how would we use our context? Well, in the private route, anywhere where we are doing this now, we don't use local state anymore. Local state was only leveraged inside of the provider. So instead, we're going to say const JWT equals use context, right? And the context is the user context. What do we call it? Hold on. Private route. Where is it? User provider. Yeah, user context is what we called it. Now, the problem here is that when I want to use the count context in count display, how do we get access to that variable? So maybe there's more to it than that. Oh, I guess we need to import it. So they're exporting count provider. But that's the provider. That's not the actual context, right? When we use it. Oh, is that, do they export that as well? Hold on. Do they export the context? So when they say create count context, do they export it as well? Maybe just make sure I'm not missing that somewhere. So there's export count provider, which returns the context object. So does that mean that we'll have access to the count context? Because we're creating it here and exporting it, or we're returning it here, which is exported via the provider. Now, maybe that's why they use the export like this. So if we exported the provider, just to match their code, just in case I'm missing something, if we go to the provider, and instead of export default, we say export, user provider like this, and then get rid of this import because we're not using it. Okay. So it says, yeah, user provider. Hold on. What's the warning? 3 errors. Private route parsing identifier. Oh, has already been declared. So if we just do this, okay. So now it's saying, well, first we need to import use context from React, but then it doesn't know what user context is. So if I try to control space that, does it figure out what it is? No, it does not, right? So how do we know what user context is if we want to use that context? And that's currently where I'm scratching my head. So what they say is custom consumer hook. Most of the APIs for context usages I've seen in the wild look something like this. Import something context from some context package, blah, blah. But I think it's a missed opportunity of providing a better user experience. Instead, I think it should be this. Use something from some context package. Something equals use something. This has been the benefit. This has the benefit of you being able to do a few things, which I'll show you in the implementation now. Okay, so let's see. So they do still the count context, create it. There we go. There's the export I was looking for, right? They're exporting use count. So function use count here is what uses the context, and we have access to that here. If it's undefined, then whatever. Okay, so there. Now this is the more complete example I was looking for. Fair enough. This is how we bumble through things. So this makes sense to me. So if we go back to our provider here, go back to our provider. You see that we're only exporting user provider, which is why the private route says, I don't know what user context is. Right? So I'm not exporting user context here. But what they're saying is, hey, you can create another function called, use user, or whatever it is that you want to, do. And this function can do the stuff I was trying to do in the other code here. So it can leverage this code. So let me cut this out, and let me go back to my here and paste it in here. Right, we want to use the context, which we'll import from React, right? And this time it knows what user context is because we've created it up here, right? Now they have some an error code here to say, hey, if, and this is called context. You know, if the context is undefined, then we can throw a new error. Use user must be used within a user provider. In other words, if we don't have access to the context here, if we've exported, we export the use user function. If we're using user outside of the user provider context or user provider component tree, the context will be null essentially. So it'll throw that error. Okay, cool. I think, unless I'm missing something else, you know, upstairs here, I'll save this. And now what the code looks like in our private route is we can say const what is it? How do you, is it use user? Because we want to import that. I guess we just import it as a function, right? So we're not using local state, we're not using context, but we do want to import use user from user provider, right? So use user will return the context. So now we can say const, what do you say, JWT or context? Const something equals use something. Const user equals use user, right? Now the question is, what is stored inside of user, right? Which I think is just like the JWT. So anywhere that you see JWT, you would replace it. Now this was code that I wrote previously. I'm gonna actually delete it because we don't need it anymore. Why is this stuff, what am I missing? Okay, this is part of the private route. So this is saying, hey, if we have a user, then inject it. So basically everywhere else we can do that. We can delete this stuff here and save, and get rid of the handle JWT. I have no idea if this is gonna work. So, where is this one? Use provider, error in app.js. Oh. App.js imported as, oh, I see. Here, this is the wrong syntax now because I changed the user provider export from default to be like a function or whatever the word is. So we need to change it to use the brackets instead. Okay, so now I have no idea if this is going to work. Let's refresh the page here. It looks like it's broken. So that's probably because the login page is referencing the JWT. So same concept here, right? Const user equals use the user, right? And import this. Come on. Oh, user. Whoops. Use user. Right? And then I think, again, don't quote me, but I think anywhere we're using JWT, we can get rid of this. So anywhere we are using JWT, we can replace that with the word user. Ooh, and then set JWT here changes the so how do we update the context? I'm not sure, actually. How do you update the context? Right? How do you Ooh, and then there's a consumer as well. We did not. Counter thing extends React component. Count consumer. So do we need to wrap our code in count consumer? Oh, if you can use hooks. So I think he's using two different examples of it. So how do you consume, or how do you update the value, right? Because that's kind of what we need to do there. So we can use context, and that just shows it. Do we have code for updating it? provider. Because this is what's modifying the state, right? This count reducer concept, which is use reducer, state, and dispatch. No, you might need to... And the value is being passed through the provider as a prop. So count reducer. So show me it being used, right? So the custom consumer component. So blah, 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 return children. So here they are, but he says this is what I used to do before. We had hooks and it worked okay. I would not recommend this approach. Well, can you show me an approach of using it? Okay, what's this? This looks interesting. So, because it looks like he used dispatch here, dispatched. So on click, it would dispatch or whatever, and it would do something to update that consumer or that context. But it looks like this is not using hooks, and I do want to use hooks. So maybe we can have an example of how to use hooks up here. So we have, what is this? The count context. This is a TypeScript version of it. Without anyone can use count without having to do undefined checks. What about typos? Async. Here we go. Update. What happens if you have a situation where you need to make some asynchronous request and you need to dispatch multiple things over the course of that request? You can do it at the calling component, but manually wiring all that together for every component that needs to do something is pretty annoying. What I suggest is you make a helper function within your context module, which accepts dispatch along with blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we have an async function update user that accepts dispatch, user, and updates. What's updates? Dispatch type start update, try, await, user client update user. Where did user client come from? Well, I guess I need to understand more about dispatch because I haven't learned about it yet. Final version of the code. Oh, I see, because there's some state and an action. This might have something to do with the concept of a reducer. So for each action type, there's a case that, if you want to increment it, boom. If you want to decrement or decrement it, boom. The default is, I don't know what you want me to do. So use reducer passes in that count reducer with like an initial state, and then dispatch comes from use reducer. Gotcha. Now I'm sort of following along, and the value that's being passed in here is a combination of both the state and the dispatch, so that you can use that if you like. And it passes through the children, which might need to happen. That's probably something I am missing. Now that when you visit the page, it was just a blank page before. That's probably because I'm not passing through the children. Okay, so interesting. The question is, what is use reducer, I guess? React use reducer. Just want to see, is this overkill? So use Or did he make that up? Oh no, here it is. Use reducer. What is this? An alternative to use state. It accepts a reducer of type state and action and returns a current state paired with a dispatch method. If you're familiar with Redux, you already know how this works. So yeah, I haven't used Redux before myself, so that's why there's a blank spot here. So it is usually preferable to use state when you have complex state logic that involves multiple sub-values or when the next state depends on a previous one. Gotcha. I don't think we have that here. I at least not that I don't believe we have that as a situation with our current logic. So if we assume we don't have to use this reducer, then really this gets simplified to just having the state, right? But then how do we update that state? And that's where this concept of dispatch, you can leverage it, I think. So how then do we update the state through our provider? Right? So how did they do it? He has this concept of update user as another function which does all this, but maybe we don't need to have all that crazy functionality. Maybe we just need to say have a in our user provider, we just have as paired with our user provider, we can have a function, function update user with essentially a new JWT, right? And then what we can do is we can say, hey, set, interesting, I want to be able to set JWT, right? Which leads me to want to do this to move that up here. But then is that, it can't be, okay, so you can't use a hook up there. Interesting. Because I want to be able to use set JWT here to say JWT. Right, but I'm not able to access the setter method of JWT because that's being used in here, which, could be one of the benefits of using this reducer concept, right? Because here they have user provider, use user, and update user, right? So this is mimicking what we have right here. So it looks like it's similar code. Because we would want to export update user as well, right? You'd want to export update user so that you can actually update it. Now, the problem here is that, like I said, we can't access the setter method to update the value of our JWT, which is annoying. Now, maybe we can do this, but then it's saying what? Oh, okay, so again, it's just a regular old function, so it's not happy with us. We can't do that. Yeah, it's not a full React functional component, so you can't. Fair enough, you can't use state. So I can see why he might want to leverage this idea of what you call it. Reducer, because we can't, it doesn't seem like we can use state. So let's have a look at his example with the reducer, right? So we can take a look at the reducer concept. So let's see. I think we would have a user reducer, right? We could just call this I guess we could say log out and log in, right? And the state state that we want to return, it's returning an entire object, which I think we don't necessarily need to do that. But don't I have the exact same problem here? It's saying I want to return an object with a key of count. So our JSON web token is just a string, right? That's really all it is. So we essentially want to return a string of null, right? When we log out, we want it to be null. When we log in, we want to return the state that's being passed in, I think, right? So user reducer is there, and then that's part of our thing up here, right? Instead of saying local state here, I mean, it could be part of it. We can say use reducer with what? With the user reducer. And what is the initial initializing arg? JWT, I guess, because we're grabbing it here. We're grabbing the value of JWT. So in our reducer, we want to set that, state, so to speak. Okay. And that returns two things, state and dispatch. Right? Now with our state and dispatch, we can create a value, which is composed of the state and dispatch, right? And then we can get rid of the set. We don't necessarily need set JWT. And then the value is the value. Okay? So then when we update user, this is where we can call dispatch. At least I believe so. Let's see. So, and also they need to, the provider should probably have the children that we pass along. So the children should be rendered in here. Right, and we'll see that when we actually leverage the user provider. Yeah, this is pretty complex stuff. This is definitely not straightforward, which is why this video is so long. But hopefully, this is giving you a lot of my stream of consciousness, and hopefully you are understanding it along with me. Hopefully, that's my intention for this video. Okay. Oftentimes you see someone teach it like they already know it, and I think this provides some value where you're going through the learning journey with me. This is the learning journey that you would have to go through watching someone else's video. So I don't know. I think there's value to that. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If you are, give it a like. If you're not, you can give it a dislike. That's perfectly fine. So, okay. So their use count, which I think is use user, is using the context. That's fine. But then we want to be able to update. So where's the update example? So the update example here, the update user has dispatch, the user, and then updates. So dispatch. Now here's where I'm confused about type, but I guess that's what we did up here, right? The somehow action.type is the string that we're passing in. So when we update a user, interesting. We want to start update with updates, and then okay. I see. So So here's an example of how to leverage update user. So there's user profile. So we have a user settings object, let's say, there's a user settings view. We want to use user, okay, which is pulling in all of this information. Now, if we submit the form that has an event or whatever, we can say, hey, call the update user function, which comes from the context. Okay. and pass in user dispatch, user and form state. So the form state is the updates. The user, in this case, I'm assuming hasn't changed, and the user dispatch is just coming from here. So the form state is the updates. So you're saying, hey, dispatch a start update with the form state, and then you do a try catch. So you say, I want to do user client.update user. I'm not sure where user client just came from. Again, I kind of dislike when they throw in a variable. They just throw it in there and assume you know what they're talking about, right? So we changed our context, not to confuse the word. We changed our example, and he's assuming I know what user client is. Dot update user, right? So I mean we have an update user here. So is this a different method? Again, there's some assumptions being made here that I'm not privy to, probably because of my lack of understanding or knowledge or experience with, Redux or something. I don't know. So it's awaiting. So update user here is, I mean, it looks like it's just calling itself. Maybe it's just calling itself. Maybe that's all that's happening here. We're passing in user and updates, updated user, and then dispatch finish update or fail update. Okay, and then So here with the increment and whatnot, you don't have to pass in state, right? You're passing in an action, and the action is performing, you're modifying the state based on some predefined concept. Whereas with mine, with the reducer I want to be able to use the state, right? So I'm not sure that's being captured here. We'll see. So if you're able to use hooks at all, skip this section. However, if you need to support React, whatever, okay. So let's just go back to his code above here to see if for some reason I missed something. So we have the use count, which is like our use user, which grabs the user context and just returns it. Oops, I forgot to return it. That's important. That's a good little bug catch there. And the provider, has this reducer, which I think we've done all that. Yeah, I'm not sure I see how to properly... I guess that's what this is, though. Dispatch, and then you can dispatch the... So let's just say this. Let's just say, for update user, user and then updates. Let's see. It's almost like I don't care about the action, if you will. I just want to return the state. It's like I don't care about the action, right? That's what I'm feeling anyway. And I just want to say, hey, dispatch, anything here, right? And then the updates is what I want to pass along. Okay, except then I'm ignoring a user, and I'm not sure if that's... I mean, it looks wrong. It looks like I'm ignoring user, which I am in this update user. So is it updates or is it user? I guess I can do a log, right? Let's say user, and let's say log updates updates. Right? That's kind of what I want to do. Now, okay. So this dispatches updates, and then this says update user with user and then updated user, and then finish update with updated user. Yeah, I'm just not sure. I guess we'll play with it and see what shakes out. So let's go to the index. And in here, we're using JWT, right? I want to do a set JWT, but we can't do set JWT. So let's leverage, update user, which is what the function we created previously. And we want to pass in the state, which is what I'm saying is, we don't need the string wrapper, is this guy. Right? That's essentially what I'm talking about. So, okay. So we're getting a bunch of bad requests here because the let's go to localhost 3000 login. It's going right to dashboard. Let me go to clear out the application. Let me clear out the, oh, it is already cleared. So why would it be redirecting to the dashboard screen if so if we go to localhost 3000, we're good. Since JWT is empty, if we go to login, it's trying to go to the dashboard for some reason. Yeah. So why is that happening? So index, there must be some logic in here that does that. If user is not equal to null, oh, okay. So let me get rid of this code for now, because that's probably why it's there. Okay, so that's why it was redirecting. Right? So if we go to console, okay, so let's do a log on user to see what's up. Okay, so the state of the user is empty at the moment, right? Cool, that makes sense. So if we try to log in, what happens? Dispatch is not a function. Okay, so user is undefined, updates is undefined. So user is undefined, so we called use, where is it? We called this update user with the JWT. So when we called update user, it went into the context, wherever that is, provider, and it went into update user, and then here's the two messages, right? User and updates. So they're both undefined, which is not what I anticipated. So, okay. What am I doing wrong? Use reducer, state, and dispatch. Oh, it's probably, it could be because I wasn't leveraging, is it because I'm not leveraging their, oh no, this is the count context consumer thing. This is saying, hey, if you're using hooks, don't bother with this stuff. So yeah, probably the use something is where in the component is where we can actually leverage this code. And I don't believe they had any examples where we had to wrap other objects. So there's the provider, right? So we have the provider, which we've wrapped around what? The provider in app.js is here, which is wrapping around everything. Oh, and then we don't need to pass in handle JWT. This is old code. I've removed the need for that. And also, so the whole concept of JWT here, well, this kind of goes along with the provider, right? That's the provider here is what sort of manages some of this stuff. So we'll have to export more stuff. Okay. So we have the provider. Is there anything else I'm missing? So the display uses context. Right? And I think we're doing that. So in the login screen, we're doing a log on user, which is use user, which uses the context, right? Use context, whatever. So, and that did not return undefined. So when we visited the page, we saw this right here, right? So we see it has something. So this context seems to be doing something. The problem is updating. When we say update user, let's do a log here as well. User reducer state and user reducer action. Just to get more logs, right? See more of what's under the hood. So when I try to log in, we just see those two, right? It doesn't even go into the user reducer, which should happen essentially on load, I would assume. If I refresh this page, I see state and I see state, but I don't see anything about this user reducer function, right? Which is used here. And is that how they did it in their code? Did I have a bug there? So they do use reducer, and then they pass in count reducer, which is count reducer is their function with state and action, and then it has the action types and everything. So I mean, it looks like, so it says it doesn't need to be using use reducer, I guess. Feel free to use state if that suits your scenario. In addition, some providers are going to be short. Again, I would like to use state, but it didn't seem like that would work because of our workflow here. Now, unless, are we able to, like the update user is where we want to set the state, right? So are we able to, and I forget if you can do this or not, can I cut that out and paste it into here? Can we have a function nested inside? Maybe, right? Because then this becomes interesting, right? Then it's like user provider dot update user or something, you know? How do you do that? Then it kind of becomes private to because then in here, then I would be able to say set JWT, right? That was the whole point, because this has set JWT. How do you update the state, right? You update it with, updates or whatever, or this, whatever you want to pass in here, JWT, then you can update it like this, right? That's sort of what I want to be able to do, but I don't have access to, when I move this function up, I lose access to my setter method because that's not part of the oops. Oh my gosh. Holy cow. I can't undo. Something just happened with my, oh man. My control Z just completely betrayed me. Export use user and user provider. Now I am kind of mixing state here with, in terms of types of states, but I do want it to be stored. I want it to be stored in local storage. So I think that's okay to be using local storage state as well as context state. Okay, just for off camera for about, I don't know, 5-ish minutes. I have a meeting coming up, so I had to be quick here. I went off camera to just do some more research about other examples of using this without, using context without use reducer, rather using context while leveraging use state. And one of the articles that I read had a very simple explanation. This dispatch is essentially for use reducer. That's what we try to use to set the value. And that's what we're passing in our value here. So instead of passing that in the value, you can just pass set JWT, right? So there's the state, which represents JWT, and then there's set JWT, which represents this. So you're kind of mixing the getter and setter concept here in the value for user context provider, thus eliminating the need for using the dispatch thing. And then this state just becomes JWT, right? So that's encapsulated into the value concept here. So then you don't need a reducer or anything, and you can just say when you export use provider, part of the value is the ability to set the state. Now, I'm wondering if there's a use case for. I didn't look at the article. I should have probably looked at the article for how they actually leveraged it. But I immediately was like, oh, okay. Then you have access to the set JWT thing from the user provider. So let me just see if I can figure this out in the next, 3 minutes, because I need to go to a meeting. So in the login, when we want to update the user, this is no longer going to work because I don't think user provider. Have we saved everything? Oh, does the user provider still have... No, it doesn't have an update user method anymore, right? So there we go. Now there's an error. Okay, so let's go back to the index. So this, login. Where is it? Use local state. No, the update user now doesn't come from user provider. So instead, I think, can we say user.set JWT with the headers? Is that how you would do that? Okay. So if I say Trevor, ASDF, that looks better. Yeah. Okay, I think that worked. So, now we can say, hey, if user.jwt, then we can redirect, then we can say navigate to dashboard. Boom. Now there's another problem in here because now whenever we leverage, I get this error now because user in the dashboard, so if I open up the dashboard index, the user variable somewhere, I forget where this is happening, we need to say user.jwt now, essentially, because that's sort of how it's encapsulated. So cool. So I just finished my other meeting, and I'm coming back to this code. So basically, what I want to hopefully finish up with is replacing the JWT here from use local state. Replace it with the user equals use user command, right? So that will pull in the sort of the JWT. And now anywhere we have JWT written, let me select all of these. How do we change all occurrences to instead of being just JWT? Well, shoot. We need to say user dot JWT. The only problem is this one is not set user. It is, what do we say? User dot JWT. How do we do this one again? I just did this in login. User dot set JWT. Right. So user dot set JWT to be null if they log out. Let me save this. Okay, hopefully the code is okay there. So this way we're going to leverage the Yeah, use user instead. So let's try this. Log in. Trevor, ASDF. Shoot, still. So there's a problem with the auth validate token. It's sending. Where is this happening? Where is auth API auth validate token happening? There must be a. Oh man. There's too many. Stop. So there must be a. There's an intermediary step there. Is that in the private route? I forget. So in private route, we're saying. Yeah. Okay. Here. So user.jwt, right? User.jwt. So that's the problem. Right? Let's look for JWT. Yeah, it's just in those two places, so I'll save that. That should fix our endless loop, and there we go. So now we've logged in as the student. Great. If we log out, does that work? Great. Can we log in as a code reviewer? Boom. But then don't tell. So the whole point of this was to avoid this problem, which is we log in as a code reviewer and it shows the incorrect view. Okay, let's not panic. Let me finish my green drink here while I ponder why this could be happening. Okay. So if I refresh, the correct view comes up. If I log out, oh, now we have a new error when I log out. Interesting. Localhost. Oh my God. Log in. Okay. So, why would the dashboard view not have the correct state for the user, right? So the user, oh, I see. I know why. I think I know why. So in app.js, remember I said I think we need to do the same thing for roles here. So the app.js uses roles from JWT, which gets confusing with the state. So, okay. So in here, let's see. We're basing the view that we are displaying is based off of the. Okay, so what I want to do here is leverage the user provider, which I thought maybe we don't even need to do this, right? If we're using hooks, do we need to use a provider like this? I forget. So instead of using JWT here, let's do the same concept. Let's do the const user equals use user, right? Which we can import from user provider. And then, but that might not be accessible. We'll see. We'll see if this works. Let's see if we can comment out our JWT thing, right? And instead, we will say user.jwt and user.jwt and user.jwt, etc., right? So now we're leveraging the state there. So use user must be used inside of a user provider. So the problem here is I'm trying to use the user here on the app level, but that app is not wrapped with user provider. Which, I mean, can I do that through the index.js file? Can I just, instead of wrapping everything in browser router here, can I wrap it with a user provider here? I'm providing the user to the app, right? Yeah, okay, cool. Now inside of the app, I don't need to do the user provider here because I'm already providing it to the entire app, right? So we can get rid of that complexity. Okay, so the JWT is null currently. So if I log in as a student, cool, we see the student view. Log out, the JWT goes back to null, cool. Code reviewer, log in, beautiful. Log out, do we get the same problem? Yeah, so there's something wrong with logging out as a, when we log out from the, well, that could just, you know what, that's probably what's happening is that's a different view, right? The code reviewer dashboard view index.js is, yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, okay. So at least I know the problem there. So this one is a different file that's leveraging the old way. So all these references to using local state for JWT here need to be augmented with user, right? And then anywhere we see JWT, what is it, Control F2 to replace, but I don't want to replace all, see, this is not as good, right? I don't want to replace these instances. Anyway, so user.jwt, user.user.user.user. And then here, yeah, exactly, right? And then any other errors? I don't think so. So that should solve that problem, right? So when we're logging out of the app as a code reviewer, we're going to be leveraging that new code. So now log out, there we go. Log in as a student view. Done and dusted, there you go. So, sweet. That is an extremely long video for you guys showing me struggling through learning the idea of React context. But hopefully this is a valuable experience for you because you experienced how I learn stuff as a, lead developer slash, I don't know if you can call me an architect, but with 15 years of experience. That's what it looks like for someone like myself to learn something I've never really learned about before with respect to this context stuff. So I realize it's a longer video. Hopefully you got a lot out of this type of structure. Now, obviously I can do another video with this new information. I can just redo this whole thing and pretend like I got this under control. And here's where you do this here, you do that there with none of the struggle. But to me, there's a lot of learning that can happen as a part of the struggle that hopefully you guys get as well through these videos. So thanks so much for watching. If you really did like it, please do give us the thumbs up. It really helps to spread the word. Click on my circle icon above my face here to subscribe to the channel. And as always, take care of yourself. Happy learning, and bye for now.